Welcome to NewYorkBIO's virtual breakfast series. Digital program started in 2020, bringing you fireside chats with leaders from across the healthcare spectrum. This week's episode features Stephen Chambers and Gwen Cheni of IndieBIO.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Jennifer Hawksland, and I am the CEO at NewYorkBIO. We're thrilled you're here for another virtual breakfast series. Thank you to our partner and sponsor, the New York Stock Exchange. We are very much looking forward to the first of two emerging biotech company showcases that we're doing in partnership with the NYSE this year. The first one will be on June 23rd, and we will be featuring companies from Europe. So we're really branching out. We're going global. NewYorkBIO is expanding our reach, and how appropriate since we have some of our guests today, Stephen, who I don't think is originally from the US. So we're just going to fold all of that in together today. With that, as always, please ask questions throughout our conversation with Gwen and Stephen. Use the chat feature or the Q&A box. Derek and I will see those and feed them to our guests throughout the conversation. With that, we're glad you're here. We look forward to our discussion today, and I'm going to pass it over to Derek to introduce our guests more thoroughly. Thanks.
Okay, thanks so much, Jennifer. Gwen and Stephen, it's great to have both of you here. As you know, we talk a lot about the evolution of New York City's early stage biotech and bioscience ecosystem, and the arrival of IndieBIO in the last couple of years has certainly been a big entrant, and we're really excited to have you here. So, as we tend to do here, we tend to kick off things with a bit of an origin story. And Stephen, I think we can start with you. We haven't quite had a running list of characters from Billion Dollar Molecule on the program, but you can be the first one, and we'll hopefully get to tick off all of the others. So thank you so much for being here with us. And why don't you give us a little bit of background about how you got to where you are?
Thank you, Derek. Great to be here and talking to everybody. Like as Jennifer pointed out, I'm not originally from the US. So I've been in the US 30 years. I came here after my PhD. I was one of the founding scientists, as Derek pointed out, at Vertex Pharmaceuticals. Like if you don't know, there are two books actually. There's Billion Dollar Molecule, which maps out the very early stages of the company. And then there's Antidote, which is a later stage. Both fascinating books, kind of they're written by Barry Worth, who was kind of embedded with the company. So it's a kind of a fly on the wall take on early stage startup in biotech. Very interesting reads. I think that's all I'll probably say about it. Vertex Pharmaceuticals was kind of like an interesting, for someone who just come out of his PhD, and it was not my first job, but it was one of my first jobs. Wanted to sort of get into structure-based drug design. That was kind of what I wanted to do, and Vertex were one of the early pioneers of structure-based drug design, kind of like broke the mold a bit. The interesting story with Vertex is that, they originally started out, and this is captured in the book, Billion Dollar Molecule. They were originally basically looking at FK506, binding to FKBP as an immunosuppressive. And what the book charts is basically the failure to do that. They didn't understand enough about the immunosuppressive pathway and kind of like the complications that were involved in it. And we always said at the beginning of the company, we'd never be an antiviral company. So we got so far down the road with immunosuppressive, and we couldn't do anything about it. So we just did a quick pivot, and we became an antiviral company, and we basically got a number of drugs approved around antivirals. HIV was the first one with Aprinavir, and then Hep C was the second one with Telepavir. So we kind of did a bit of a pivot, which was kind of interesting. I then did another company after being at Vertex for 18 years. I did Apro Therapeutics, which was a bispecific antibody company. Started it at the totally wrong time. During the banking crash, all the financing kind of like disappeared for the company. So we had to basically do it one customer at a time, which was kind of like an interesting process. Eventually we got some deals and we were kind of like off to the races. But again, two different startups, kind of like very different mechanisms that we had. And then after that, did a lot of angel stuff and had good exits from both the companies and sort of did angel stuff. Got recruited to the UK to help them start up their synthetic biology commercialization. The UK government at that time invested a lot of money into synthetic biology, basic research synthetic biology, and they were terrified they weren't going to get any commercial outcomes from the investment that they made. So I was kind of recruited to make sure that there was some commercial results coming from the basic research. So that was quite successful. It kind of on the terms of starting up companies and getting equity financing. Came back again to the US, did angel stuff and kind of some VC stuff, and then got recruited to IndieBIO. Here I am at IndieBIO.
All right. So, and Gwen, going to you, I mean, you guys basically, you know, make up a pretty amazing team here, and I think we'll see a little bit why as you go through how you got to IndieBIO. But you know, I think your skill sets and your experiences here are remarkably complementary. So why don't you give us a little bit of background on how you got here?
Yeah, sure. So I actually come from the dark side, which is Wall Street. One of the many Wall Street refugees, as they're called nowadays. So I spent 18 years on Wall Street, started at Goldman, associate years were at JP Morgan, and then I was at 5 different buy-side shops, eventually got promoted to be a portfolio manager at a tech hedge fund that was using M&A strategies. So very similar to a venture private equity strategy. We had 29 takeouts, acquisitions in 4 years. So proof in the pudding. I think working for 18 years on Wall Street, I wanted to give back to, you know, the world. And so I started on the board of advisors of Singularity University, which is 100% impact focused. It was originally funded by Google and Genentech. So that got my interest in early stage venture. And so I think looking back, there's some similarities in IndieBIO's focus on human planetary health. Singularity University was very much the cohort that I was responsible for was completely on climate change. I also helped them launch their Nordic chapter in 2019. So have some experience in launching a new biotech incubator accelerator. I think the other thing that is super complementary between Steve and I, so I was pre-med and I did work at UCSF for 2 years doing immunotherapy for glioblastoma before business school. So I understand the basics of science to just be dangerous and ask all the dumb questions. I think there needs to be a Gwen on every team because somebody has to ask all the dumb questions, and that's definitely me. But Steve and I, you know, so from our backgrounds, you can tell that, you know, we come from very different backgrounds. But so far, the last 5 months, I've only disagreed with them once. And it was on, you know, a failed strategy for a startup, right? So we've agreed on every single thing, every single day. And that's been very surprising to me. I also think that, you know, he comes from an operating perspective, whereas, you know, I bought my first stock at 11. I think of everything through an investment lens. I also spent a year and a half at a Series A fund. So my questions tend to be tougher because I'm prepping our founders for their next future rounds.
Mm-hmm. So as we get into things, why don't we talk a little bit about IndieBIO's model, a little bit of the background on IndieBIO, because I think there are a lot of preconceptions about what early stage venture is. And when it comes down to it, everybody kind of has a little bit of a different flavor. There are some funds that start their own companies. There are some funds that look for teams. So it would probably be a really good idea to just kind of walk through a little bit of what IndieBIO's process is and, you know, kind of how the entire company and fund has evolved. So you guys started out in San Francisco and, you know, kind of worked this process to the point where I think you have something that's repeatable and hopefully transferable now, yes?
Yeah. So one of the things that people might not be aware of is that we are a VC fund at the end of the day. So there is SOSV is the venture fund behind various accelerators around the world. And IndieBIO is just one of them, and the life science one. So there is a hacks one, there's a mobile technology one, all spaced around the world. And the kind of business model that we have is we use a third of the fund basically on the programs that we run. Okay, so we take companies, very early stage companies, a lot of hairs on the companies, a lot of kind of issues with them. And we basically put them through a program that basically gets them ready for investment, makes them more investment readiness level. And that's part of our due diligence process. So a third of the fund is used in the accelerator programs, and then 2/3 is used to follow on with these companies. So we've got over 1,000 companies, just under $1 billion under management. So we've been doing this for some time, and we do have, I wouldn't say a playbook, but we do have a process that we put these companies through. So it's not your average accelerator. It's not 4 months and you're done. Like, this is like, we stay with the companies. This is a long-term relationship that we're building with these early stage companies. And it's, you know, so it's not like, and we don't really like the word accelerator, although that the pace of what we do is accelerated. I think the word accelerator has been overused and kind of misused as well. Like, we do so much more than just, you know, work with the companies for 4 months. Like, this is a long-term relationship that we have.
So in addition to the financial capital that you provide through the formal program, you also continue to provide them with human capital and advice?
Yes. So that, you know, one of the things that like we talk about a lot is building the company. You know, it's not quite venture creation, but we have a big hand. A lot of the companies don't have a fully formed operational team, or even, you know, the co-founders as well. So we help in those on that side of things. Also on the kind of business hygiene side of things, a lot of these early stage companies come to us with truly astonishing cap tables, and we help them get them sorted out so that they look attractive to follow-on investors. The whole point of coming to IndieBIO is to get more money, to go faster. And what we do with the companies is get them in shape so that they are more investable by the time they leave the program.
Okay. So from a mechanics standpoint, what is the typical kind of deal that you look at? Do you kind of have a set term sheet, set amounts? You know, what does a company look like usually before it comes in? What are the kind of things that you like to kind of, you know, have the company do that'll have them more ready for financing when they come out?
Yeah, I'll throw that over to Gwen. She can give us.
Sure. So our standard check size is $275 with $75 in kind, and it's at a $3.3 million capped safe note. And then we actually have we've really doubled our funding. We have a second check at $250 all cash at $4.5 million cap. And the idea is to really give these companies a lot of runway so they can show a lot of technical milestones in business development for them to close a favorable seed round. And for therapeutics companies, we have a $2.25 million deal. So it is tranched, and most of it is at a 10 million cap toward the end.
Okay.
So I think I also want to highlight that we have free use of lab space. And, you know, this is not to be underestimated. There is a nonprofit in Boston that charges $18,000 per month. And so, you know, we have free lab space during the length of the program, but a lot of, you know, we've never kicked out a founder. And so we've had founders stay around for a lot longer. To your earlier question on, you know, the playbook that IndieBIO has established, that's worked really well. When I was a portfolio manager, I was actually based in San Francisco. So I've been really good friends with the IndieBIO San Francisco team. I am the human bi-coastal bridge in some ways. And so it's been really interesting porting over some of the, so I also personally invested in 3 IndieBIO companies even last year during quarantine. So I'm familiar with what type of companies come through, what types of founders are really successful, and also the programming.
Okay.
I'd add one more thing on what Steve said about, you know, what differentiates IndieBIO from other accelerators. So I've attended demo days at over, you know, probably over a dozen accelerators. I think the huge differentiating factor is we do take a pretty, you know, we're not taking single digit in terms of equity when all told, when all the safe notes are converted. So we do act like a venture firm, right, on the cap table. We don't lead future rounds, but we all pretty much almost always follow on. So it makes us a very founder-friendly VC firm. I'd say the other thing that differentiates us is, you know, Steve and I are in the lab every day, right? And so we have pretty close access to all the founders. I think, you know, so we have weekly board packs, which mimics a board meeting, but you don't get it once a quarter, you get it once a week. We also have a once a week. It really, I mean, Steve did say this.
So you basically do this so that when they get out and the board meetings are once a quarter, they're like, oh, it's so much easier now. I don't have to do this every week.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's a reason why it's called an accelerator. We also have a weekly meeting where everyone talks about only, their business development, like what deals have you won, what funding have you gotten, what revenue have you generated, right? And so the whole idea is we turn scientists into CEOs, because a lot of our teams have great science, right? So we want to be able to turn them into functional teams and great CEOs.
Okay. Well, keep going on that actually, because you said that you kind of have a good idea of what kind of founders and what kind of teams do well in the program. And I think this is really interesting for, any of the folks who may be looking at applying to IndieBIO in New York. So in your kind of experience, who are the folks that really do well, and who are the folks that get the most out of this program?
I would I'll go first, but I would say, the typical person that comes to IndieBIO is someone that's got a postdoc, probably got a PhD, done a bit of postdoc, doesn't see the academic route open to them, and is passionate about making their science real, making an impact with their science, and will be really, really passionate about their science and thinks there is an opportunity there. Doesn't know the details of it, but is sure that there's an opportunity in his research. And what he wants to do, or she wants to do, is take that research and make it real, get it into the marketplace. So that's the kind of like typical, and it's tough to say typical, but that is, what we do see a lot, and do make the most progress.
And do you require that the scientist or the founder has a full team on board to get the most out of the program, or could it be they're in the process of trying to build a team? What sort of stage, if you will, right, is the most appropriate?
I think the perfect one would be where there is a fully formed team, but we understand, especially in COVID times, it's difficult to sort of get together and build teams. So, but we do insist that we are investing on a team. So no solo founders. We need to see a team around the opportunity. So we do kind of insist on them, and we try and help them kind of understand why it is. One of the main reasons for having that is, startup is really, really tough. I know from my own experience, it's not something you want to do solo, okay? There's a lot to do. There's a lot of kind of ground to cover. You do need a team around you, a functional team that can help you.
So
what is it? Go ahead.
So to emphasize what Steve said, I think what we're looking for is somebody with technical skills and somebody that can sell. And it's possible that one person has both skills, but we still want a backup, right? So even if it's two co-founders, they can both be very, very well versed on both skill sets, and that's totally fine, but we want to see both skill sets.
Yeah.
Okay. We actually have a really good question about, so Lori says she loves the weekly board meetings, and it says, it sounds like you're really helping CEOs and founders become well educated in running the business. And she asks, how do you help them become good leaders of people? Because often those skills aren't necessarily learned in academia and grad school. And how do you instill that kind of leadership and those kind of skills in the folks that come through the program?
There is a certain amount of programming that we do throughout the course the 4 months that we have the companies. So we do have folks come in, HR folks come in and kind of give, the emotional intelligence story and kind of all that stuff. But I think one of the most important things that we do is we also have journey talks as well, where we have previous CEOs in our network. We get them and they come in and they talk about their story, about their journey, how they evolved from, kind of very kind of myopic scientists, like your typical scientist, and were able to grow and take on other skill sets and understand that they needed a team and needed to work with other folks, and kind of, so some of those journey talks are probably the most inspiring ones that you can have and the most educational.
Okay.
Yeah. Just to add some detail on that, we have over 250 hours of programming per accelerator, right? And so we have something every day, if not, twice a day, 3 times a day, right? And so this is overall generalized programming. And then in addition, we have monthly coffee hours for female founders. We have monthly alumni talks. So a previous CEO will come and talk to the current founders of, I've been in your shoes. This is what I've learned through fundraising, business development, et cetera, right? And I think the other thing is not included in the 250 hours of programming is all the one-on-one time. So Steve and I have met with our founders every other day, if not every day, right? Toward the end near demo day. For some startups, we are meeting every single day. So the amount of iteration and the amount of just improvement, the pace of improvement is tremendous, and it picks up.
Yeah, you've mentioned demo day a couple of times. What, Derek, were you going there?
I was going to get there eventually, but yeah, we can go there now.
Yeah, so tell us about what that means for your program, because there are lots of different demo opportunities out there.
You can pick that up, Gwen.
Yeah, so our demo day is June 22nd. If people want to put that on their calendars, or send me an email and I'll send you an invite, gwen.cheni@sosv.com. So I think the point of demo day is, there is an art to pitching, right? And so we actually have plus 30, plus 60, plus 90, plus 120. And from the dates, you can probably figure out that, it's 30 days from the beginning of the program, 60 days from the beginning of the program. So we have these pitch days as practice events. And we usually staff them with friendly VCs that we know, right? That will still give the founders a second chance if the first one wasn't as polished as the next one. And the whole point is to, pitching is an art that you can hone. So we get them ready to pitch and have these conversations, because fundraising, as Steve will tell you, is there's a lot of negotiation involved as well.
Yeah, as a former litigator that thought I was going to actually vomit on my first jury. Yeah, and practice you can definitely get better with practice.
So I think that's great exposure. I think one of the things that is kind of often overlooked a little bit, you said you want to make sure that you have some friendly people in the room. And I think audience construction for that is really important, because it's one thing to do your demo in front of people where the other people in the room. It's another thing entirely to do it cold. So I imagine in terms of you and of Steven, there's an immense amount of work behind the scenes that goes into setting up demo day, right? I think all of the entrepreneurs are probably rightfully focused on, what are they going to do and what is their demo going to look like? But really, from your side of the equation, you're trying to build an audience that is going to be most helpful to them. Absolutely
huge. I'd say that, there's something about crafting the story as well, right? And so it's just like when you watch a movie, the first few scenes, the first sort of intro really, and the music and everything else really sort of impacts how you frame the story in your minds. And so we do a lot of that with our follow-on investors, right? Steve and I are always on calls with our VC investors, telling them about our companies, our cohort, what companies are coming down the pike. And we're also getting feedback from them of what they're looking for, right? What they view as interesting. We have a lot of corporate LPs as well. So we do the same thing with them. What bottlenecks are you struggling with? What technology do you need, right? And so there's a little bit of matchmaking going on there. But a lot of it is just, making sure everyone's happy. I'd say that with demo day, the other thing is, the reason why we recruit friendly VCs at the beginning is that they're very open with giving transparent and honest feedback, which is exactly what these founders need, right? And so because we give them 4 of these sessions, their egos are no longer bruised. They've gotten 4 feedback sessions. So there's a lot of emotional training just through repetition as well.
They've created the scars that allow them to move forward into a more public space.
Yeah. I think it's probably worthwhile saying, as we're talking about the audience that we have, that IndieBIO was brought to New York by Empire State Development. That's one of our kind of stakeholders in this whole process. And we are part of nucleating biotech activity, life science activity in New York State. So we are part of a larger initiative. And the hope is that, like, we see IndieBIO very much as the first check in this process. It's something that's been missing from the life science ecosystem. And we're very much kind of want to provide that first check to startup companies, allowing them to get out of the lab and get into the marketplace.
That's perfect. So I actually wanted to rewind a little bit and talk a little bit about how you got to New York and what the process was like there. So can you talk a little bit about, where the idea of coming to New York even came from? And, as you started discussing it, what were some of the things that you thought were advantageous? What were some of the challenges that you thought you might face? So can we just rewind a little bit and talk about kind of what it took to get you here?
So just to follow up on that, like, so it was Empire State Development and a partnership fund for New York City. So these two entities, you know, and I think a lot of people have said, well, you know, why isn't there a large biotech industry in New York? Like we've got all these research institutions, great universities, you know, lots of folks here, the money's here. Why isn't it happening here? Obviously,
We're familiar with this discussion. Yeah.
yeah. So folks were obviously looking enviously up at Cambridge and probably over to San Francisco and go, you know, what's the missing thing? And there's lots of elements to it. But again, I think one of the things that is missing is that first check. When I was raising money in Cambridge, in Boston, it's relatively, you know, the ecosystem, you don't have to go far for it. It's like a, you know, 500-yard walk to the local VC just to have a chat with them. It's all very concentrated. I think it's the most concentrated life science cluster that's in the world. So it's, you know, it's very, and everybody knows everybody else. There's a softball league, and it's, you know, it's all very kind of very close, especially when you work in around Kendall Square, although it is expanding now to Seaport and out into Lexington and what have you. But so the idea was, like, can we nucleate activity? Can we bring all these disparate kind of like characters in the New York system? Can we kind of start bringing them together and start talking and start working together? Not in an adversarial way, but is there some synergies that we can bring to it? And I think the kind of thing that we are very much, and why they reached out to IndieBIO, because it was so successful with those early stage companies in San Francisco. That's what they wanted. Like you've got to have your big players, but you've also got to have like this constant churn of startups coming. So I'm old enough to remember that when it was like that in Cambridge. So, you know, back in the day, probably 30 years ago, Cambridge was like that. It was a bit of a kind of a bandit town. It wasn't kind of the Cambridge you see now, but there were a lot of startups. And it kind of just grew and grew and grew, and other big companies started to come into the area. But it started off with startups, little companies, and they attracted the larger companies. So, you know, the hope is that we're going to be able to do the same thing.
So I'll add some numbers to that, because clearly I'm the numbers person on this team. In 2013, so if you look at VC dollars to NIH dollars, right? And so, you know, how many dollars follow on NIH dollars? In 2013, New York State was getting 7 cents on the dollar, right? So for every dollar of NIH dollars that came into New York State, only 6 cents of VC dollars came. So not great. Last year, we were at 73 cents. So huge improvement. However, we have a lot of room to improve, because Boston is in the dollars, like several dollars, right? And so, you know, there's a lot of room to grow. We're definitely moving in the right direction, but a lot to catch up on.
Yeah, the metric of how much early stage NIH funding translates into how much in venture funding. It's actually a pretty good metric, and you know, it's actually nice to see us moving in the right direction there. It's not in the same realm as the top two, but frankly, it's a lot better than it used to be. And there's been a lot of things that have happened here that I think have, you know, made a positive impact on that. And hopefully everything keeps going in the right direction. So when all of this happened, you know, what was the internal discussion like? Because you had those numbers, right? You looked at what the typical ratio was. You looked at what was happening, and you know, did you look at this as an opportunity where you really thought you could come in and do really well? Were you skeptical about it? What were some of the things that made you think that, yeah, we can actually come and be successful here?
Like SOSV was looking to expand to New York even before ESD got in touch. So we were looking to not necessarily franchise the model, but just kind of expand into other markets. Basically, you know, we live or die on deal flow. So we want to sort of constantly be looking for new areas that we can farm deal flow from. And the East Coast and kind of New York were an obvious choice. So it was fortuitous that ESD did reach out to us and, you know, start the process around talking to it. So Sean O'Sullivan, who's behind SOSV, who's the managing director of SOSV. So he is a New Yorker. He was born in New York. He lives out in New Jersey, in Princeton. So like we're here for the duration, like we're here for good. Okay, so we're not going anywhere. Like we're not disappearing after ESD. Like the ESD support or the subsidy goes for 5 years. Like we're hanging around much longer than that. Like as we said at the top of the call, we are looking for a permanent place to set up shop here.
Yeah. So you come to New York, and well, you came here smack dab in the middle of the pandemic. So how was the last? You know, it's one thing to try and build something new, even in the best time that's difficult. But how have you fared over the last year with needing to be virtual?
Oh, well, it was phenomenally successful. Like it was like the cohort that graduated just at the kind of the end of summer last year. Like they've done phenomenally successful in terms of fundraising. So despite everything, and I think that says a lot about the character of people that do startups, like resilience. You know, that's what the characteristics of a lot of them do have, is they're just resilient. And you know, some little pandemic isn't going to stop them. They're going to keep going. So the cohort that graduated did really well. Kind of, I won't give you the numbers, but they did really well in terms of follow-on financing. Like we're really happy with them. Like they've still got a lot of their journey to complete, but they did really well. The thing that we've noticed with the pandemic is that people quite quickly went to remote. Like it was, you know, it didn't really stop our programming. We just gave programming remotely. We did a lot of Zoom, like it was pretty exhausting, but we did a lot of Zoom. And there was, like, people were still wanted to sort of meet up. Like we had an unexpected bio meeting about a month ago. Normally we'd get like 200 people in a room if we did that kind of event. We had 600 people online. Okay, so wow. You know, so they're still there reaching out. People still want that connectivity. It's possible to do it online. It's not the best way. Like the best way is to have, you know, both the people and the companies there where we can sort of meet with them every day. And we've seen that in the present cohort, is that the pace that they have, the cadence they've been able to build has been so much faster when they're with us in New York than when they're not with us. Yeah, so I think you know, the companies that managed to survive the pandemic, like I think the future looks very rosy for them.
Mm-hmm. So where are you now? Go ahead, Jennifer.
No, that's fine. I was going to shift a little.
Well, I was wondering where you are now in terms of the cohort that you're looking at. Are you going to have people back in the labs? You know, what is your kind of back to the labs type of strategy? Are you operating, you know, fully in person now, and do you expect the next cohort to be in person?
Yeah, the current cohort is like it just ended last week. So that was like a hybrid one. If people could come to New York, then, you know, and work with us, great. But we didn't force anybody to come to New York. The interesting thing about the cohort is a lot of them are New York East Coast. So that's and obviously they could come to New York, and we're happy to come to New York. So, you know, that's been good. The folks that couldn't make it, like we totally understand, it's probably not the best time for traveling. So the next cohort that we're having in August, we're going to be saying it's in place, it's fully in person, the program. Again, if anybody has, and everybody's going to be vaccinated, and you know, everybody's going to be in place. If folks, you know, don't want to come, like, then we'll see what we can do about that.
Okay. Yeah, so actually that's what I was going to ask, is a question of your locations, right? So are you agnostic when you accept a company into the program, or do they obviously preferably will relocate to New York City for the duration of the program, but what about their sort of permanent home location of the company?
Yeah, that's interesting. So what we found is a lot of the companies, so obviously we look for the best in New York. We're trying to grow the New York ecosystem, but part of that is attracting other folks from around the world into the New York ecosystem to show the value of it. A number of companies come here and start seeing the value. They come from the UK or Singapore, and they see the value of what's going on in New York. You know, the access to money, the access to kind of like, you know, corporate side of things. So there is a real kind of draw magnet to pull folks to New York, and we see that in the program. I think the numbers are maybe about 40% of the out in IndieBIO San Francisco, 40% of the outer state companies that go to IndieBIO San Francisco stay there.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's one reason we've partnered, we've put down several years with the New York Stock Exchange partnership on New York, highlighting New York companies and their growth. But that's one reason we decided to expand to European companies, right, for this event, because often they will want to eventually come to the US, whether it's accessing our markets, whether it's accessing our capital. And because they almost all have consular offices here, we think that New York obviously is the place they should start.
Yes, most definitely. As a, coming from the UK, I would definitely recommend. And also that the time difference is kind of manageable.
Yeah.
You're kind of like, next to time zones. So it's not totally complicated to sort of communicate and have a relationship.
Yeah, we've definitely noticed that. We let the founders pick their geographic preference, whether it's San Francisco or New York. But we've noticed that Europeans and LATAM founders prefer New York. So there might be some thesis there. I think the other trend that we've noticed is that I think people underestimate. Bio isn't just therapeutics, and basically Steve's track, right? So that was biotech 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Now bio is sort of infiltrating every other sector. And so the fact that New York has great Michelin star restaurants, that we have, we're still the fashion capital of the US at least. So we are attracting a lot of next generation bio companies where the customers are, whether it's food, future of food, or biomaterials, they prefer New York. We have a company right now that is doing skincare, right? And so there's dermatology and plastic surgeon offices up and down, Park Avenue, Madison Avenue. So their customers are right here. So I think that's the advantage of New York.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, because there is, there is kind of what I'll call the tried and true biotech path that is pure therapeutics, but you don't necessarily focus purely on that. You actually have a reasonably broad take on, what is biotech investing. And I think that's a little bit unique, and I think it's certainly unique to New York, and I think it's probably unique within the industry. So do you think that gives you a bit of an advantage in terms of, what kind of companies that you can mentor, or companies that may look to work with you because of your experience in these areas?
So I think so. I think IndieBIO has done a really good job recruiting the partners. If you look at our backgrounds, we all add something different, right? So we have one partner who comes from, a decade at DARPA. So she's great at hardware. We have another one who's great at molecular biology and, certain strains of yeast. We have another one that just graduated from Scripps, and, it's just great, fantastic on the therapeutic side. We have Steve that has run 2 companies and started a SynBio incubator in the UK, right? And so, and I come from immunotherapy and Wall Street. And so I think, and I can program, so I cover the AI ML side of things. So, if you look at how we've built the team, everyone adds a different perspective. So that's number one. And I think number 2, to your point on, the amount of latitude that we have. So our admissions rate is less than 2%. So I always joke with our founders that, getting into IndieBIO is harder than getting into Harvard. So pat yourselves on the back. And as a result of just the sheer number of applications that we get, we meet with so many founders. We learn so much about every single, aspect of different industries. Super interesting job, steep learning curve, but also it means that we have eyes and ears on everything.
Mm-hmm. So the other thing that I'll ask you is you've mentioned follow-on investing a few different times here, and I think that's really crucial, because the first check gets you somewhere, but it really never kind of takes you all the way. So one of the most crucial things for all of your companies is, where does the rest of the money come from? And I think kind of coming from New York, that was probably one of the most important things you can establish, is a really strong record of follow-on investments. So I mean, we've made the effort over the past few years. Again, we've partnered with the New York Stock Exchange, and we've kind of recognized that we want to bring more of the financial industry, into biotech, into what we do, and into kind of the swing of things here a little bit more regularly. So I would ask you what your experience has been in kind of building those follow-on networks. Have you found that most of the folks that you've seen are concentrated in New York? Are you bringing kind of people interested in New York from other areas? What have your experiences been with kind of the follow-on groups and the network you've been building on the investor side?
Do you want to go first, Gwen?
Yeah, sure. So I think, if you had asked me the same question 5 years ago, I would say it's difficult, right? But I think, just in the course of the last 5 years, a lot more funds are open to investing outside of fintech, which is, the bread and butter of New York. The last, basically, the entirety of New York has been a lot of Wall Street and fintech focused. I think because of that, we're having a lot more interesting conversations. And because, this is pretty early stage, the check sizes are small. So people are more willing to take a risk than if it's, a $10 million check, right? Whereas, our rounds tend to be in single digit millions. So I think that's a favorable aspect. I think the other aspect is because we invest in so many, like you said, we invest in such a wide array of companies, there's always something for somebody. Right. There's, if they don't want FDA approval, if they don't want to deal with the, therapeutics risk, we have a biomaterials company that sells like a CPG company. Right. So I think, these angles make IndieBIO a lot more accessible to the investor base in New York. I'd say that the other really interesting thing that we've seen is that we're sort of acting as a bridge between the Silicon Valley investors and the European investors. We have our networks in both sides. I was joking with Steve that, I actually introduced two investors in Zurich that didn't know each other, but they were looking at the same spaces, same stages. And I said, you guys should know each other, right? And same thing with LATAM. I made an intro in Brazil as well. And so, this speaks to the IndieBIO SOSV network, but also, the ability to congregate everyone together and to build that community.
Yep.
We do also see an increasing amount of investors looking for, our broad thesis is human and planetary health. And we do see a number of investors very interested on the planetary health side of things, circular economy, bioremediation. So we do see investors that are coming to us very specifically with a specific ask, as show us your companies that are working on climate change, that are working on sustainability, working on biomaterials. So there is like a growing, again, like Gwen, I would say, it's difficult, but there is this growing investor base around environmental issues and kind of planetary health.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the planetary health angle here. I mean, is it, there was for a number of years, clean tech was, kind of the bucket that everything fell under, and it got to be very, very specialized. But do you see the pendulum now swinging back to kind of include more bio in the clean tech side? Because really, ultimately, a lot of times you're talking about cellular processes, you're talking about cellular engineering, and really, you're basically talking about engineering biology. So do you see that pendulum kind of swinging back and putting it more squarely in the realm of this is actually a biotech company and this is what this looks like?
Very much so. So there's definitely been kind of a shift, a change in attitude where people, I think maybe the investors are becoming a bit more sophisticated and understanding that there's different elements out there. And they have picked up the synthetic biology or engineering biology, which is probably kind of a better term for it. And they are again asking for those types of companies. But I think what's the shift that's happened, because synthetic biology has been around for quite a bit, but I think what's happening now is they want to say, okay, show me. Okay, it's you can talk about it, all this promise, really want to show what the impact it is and how it can scale. So it's like show me time with the companies. So when we are synthetic biology companies that we have and we get in front of investors, it's very much, okay, show me the data, show me the product. It's kind of enough of the talk. They want to see the product now. And that's what we do.
So
I mean, go ahead, Jen. Gwen.
The other thing I've noticed is that, if you talk about the 80s and 90s, clean tech is really hardware, right? I think what's happened, and just because biology it wasn't cheap enough to iterate, and we didn't have, the infrastructure make it cheap enough to implement biology. So there was a call with Stefan Bancel of Moderna yesterday, and he said, the last decade was the silicon decade. This decade is the bio decade. And I totally agree with them, is that we're at that point where we can iterate fast enough to improve biology and to bring the cost down, right? So for a lot of our companies, we squint hard enough, it is at cost parity within a few years, right? So this is not science fiction anymore. This is not only does it work, but it'll be at cost. So that's the exciting part.
Yeah. Do you think we're at the point where synthetic biology is actually ready for its moment to kind of take off? I know that there's a number of leaders in the field here. Jeff Buka is one. And I know there have been other groups that have kind of, really been, kind of focusing on how does this get off the ground, trying to highlight synthetic biology. As you said, it's been around for a long time, and it doesn't really matter what we call it, but is it ready now, do you think, to be, mainstream? Is this actually a pillar of something that you think has a lot of legs and we can see as almost an emerging industry unto itself?
I'd say most definitely. I'd say, yes, it is. I think its time has come. And it's mainly because we're seeing the practical examples of it. Don't want to sort of go on about Moderna too much and what they've been able to deliver within just 12 months around a vaccine, an RNA vaccine, that, that's a real game changer. Prior to that, Moderna had a huge valuation. People were kind of skeptic that you could actually, pop RNA in and it was kind of, but they've done it. They've shown us that you can basically get the translation from RNA into protein, and then get it acts as an immunogen. So, that experiment's been done. It's been a big experiment, but it's been done. And I think there's a lot of other things that are going to come from along with that. So I definitely think there's a change going on, and maybe we're aware of it as scientists, we see it, but I think the general public is going to start seeing these products, are going to start reaching the marketplace.
So more data I'll add to this is that, the cost of sequencing has come down faster than Moore's law, right? So people aren't talking about, just the hardware cost there is a lot more favorable than what we've seen in silicon. I think the other thing that really fascinates me about SynBio is that there's also a big data software play there, right? Is, if you look at companies like Ginkgo and Zymergen, they've brought down the cost of engineering an organism by 50% every year the last decade, right? And so that's cumulative knowledge. And so it's, but I do want to caution listeners that, when you're eating an elephant, it does matter where the bites are, right? So there are certain areas that we're not in prosperity yet, right? And so, but there are definitely other areas where we're very close.
You narrowed it, but it's not all the way in yet.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm just trying to parse through the eating the elephant thing. It sounds cruel. I think we need a new animal for that. I don't think we can go with the elephant. We need a different animal. Okay. So Demo Day is coming up on June 22nd. I think we would be remiss if we didn't ask you for a couple of highlights. What are some of the companies that you're really excited about? And I imagine that is Demo Day going to be virtual or is Demo Day going to be in person?
It's sorry, Gwen, you go.
It is virtual, but we have a get together in Central Park afterwards.
Okay. So what are some of the things coming down the pipe if we sign up? Who are some of the people we're going to see, and what are some of the things you're really excited about?
You go, Gwen. You tell us your favorites. Go on.
I'm trying not to play favorites here.
Your children now.
Yeah, right. Okay, so I'll talk about the female founders first. I think one thing that we've seen is, historically we've had 42% of our companies had a female on their teams. This year, we have 40% of the companies have a female CEO. So that's been the change, right? It's not just a member of the team, but the CEO is female. And so we also have 2 teams where, the entire team is female. So I'll talk about those 2 and then I'll switch it over to Steve. So one of them is called Free to Feed. And so Iraqi veteran, Tillman scholar, she also happens to have a PhD in molecular biology, and she was working for a food company testing for allergens. So she had 2 babies, both had severe food allergies. And so when she was testing for her job, allergens in the food, she said, there's got to be a way to test for allergens in my breast milk. So she was breastfeeding, and because of her baby's food allergies, had to go on chicken and rice diet for a year each for her babies. And so there actually isn't a way to test for infant allergies for the first 6 months. Some pediatricians won't even test for it after a year. And so she's made this, so she actually has a patent granted on the antibodies. So when you eat a cow milk protein, it's actually broken down in your body into different pieces. And so she has those sequences patented and granted. So she's made a lateral flow test that tests for the presence of these antibodies in breast milk. So it's called Free to Feed, super interesting, all female founder team. She's made such tremendous progress. I think the other thing I want to highlight is that it's really rare for a scientific founder to be so good at customer discovery. So she has these 30-minute consultations. So when you have a baby, nobody really teaches you how to breastfeed. So it's a lactation consultant. She's booked solid for 30 minutes and she gets paid for it. She has 100% retention, right? And so, and just through these sessions, she's hearing what these mothers want. So she's coming out with a completely allergen-free vitamin because they're asking for it. She knows what price point they're willing to pay, right? So tremendous. I think she's a fabulous CEO. The second company I want to highlight is called Microterra. So if you think about, all these companies that are coming out with alternative, whether it's Impossible Foods and whatnot, you still need functional protein, right? Like that is a key ingredient. And so what they figured out is we got to be able to supply this without CapEx, right? Because otherwise it's too expensive to supply it. It's too slow to supply it. So they've identified this called water lentil, or otherwise called lemna. So lemna, the profile is 33% protein, 25% pectin, and the rest is fiber. Super healthy. But you do not want to be eating, basically surface pond algae, right? So they figured out a way to remove the taste, remove the color, so that it comes out as this white protein powder that is good for human consumption. So they need GRAS status, but they're selling directly into wet dog food right now. And just with 4 farms, they're able to supply 10% of Mexico. So I think the other innovation is their lack of CapEx. So they're using the surface area of fish ponds. So they're partnering with fish farmers, so they don't have to dig their own ponds, right? And the margins are super strong. There's no initial CapEx. Fantastic founders. Also another team that's fantastic with customer discovery. They interviewed 130 protein buyers between LATAM, US, and Europe, and they found out exactly what metrics they have to hit, what's interesting, what the price points are. I'll leave it there. Steve, what do you want to highlight?
I think I'd highlight bee immunity. So this is a PhD student came out of Cornell. He basically has identified a cellular mixture that can be used to detoxify pesticides in bee populations. So, like the importance of the bees, like we know, like, a lot of our agriculture is totally dependent on the pollinators. Bees are 90% of the pollinators that we have out there. They're being decimated with the use of pesticides. So he's created a mixture that you can feed to bees, and it will basically remove the pesticide from the bees, from the environment, and the bees will just kind of like poop it out. And what they've shown in basically the field tests that they've done, and they were doing this up at Cornell where they had like a laboratory experiment going on, and they were showing that basically supplying these hives with this material, like it's called a patty, it's kind of like a lick brick is the kind of commercial term that they use for it. It kind of, you could, 80% of the hives were survivable. Okay, so you basically got the other hives were decimated, and the ones with the lick brick were basically survived. And what they've done is in the program, they've basically gone out to New Jersey and Long Island, and they've been doing these field tests as well. And the data is just unbelievable. The survival rate of these hives when they're exposed to the lick bricks. So we really like this one because it touches a number of things. Like I haven't gone into a huge depth with the science side of things, but the science is kind of like rock solid. And then the data that we have, the scientific data, both in the laboratory and in the field, is kind of, solid as well. They're a great team. They're doing something really important. So, that's kind of like a typical IndieBIO team around the human and planetary health side of things, the planetary health side of things that we really like. I think the other one is sequential skin, which is an interesting one. Again, it's kind of PhD guys that were working on the skin microbiome that developed a patch that you basically put on your skin. You send it off to the laboratory. They come back and they give you a full microbiome profile of your skin. And then they make recommendations, or they will actually sell you a face mask that will have ingredients on that will help you diversify your microbiome on your face. What you want on your face is you want a diverse microbiome. Everybody's got bacteria on their face, no matter how much washing you do, bacteria is there. What you want is you want diverse microbiome. And what they have is they have the way of identifying what's on your face and then providing you with products that will create a diverse microbiome that will help eliminate the bad bacteria that you have. Again, like another one that's been phenomenally successful, a lot of market traction around B2B side of things, but they've also made inroads into the B2C side of things, and they have revenue. So a lot of our companies, amazingly early stage, but have been throughout the program have been able to develop revenue, showing definite market product fit.
Wow.
Well, I'm going to need another cup of coffee.
Signing up for, yes.
I'm before I can talk about the bad bacteria on my face in the morning, I'm going to need another cup of coffee. Although I'm fully on board with the with the bees one, because you read the articles about how big of a challenge that is, and they get to the end and they say, what's the solution? And everyone kind of shrugs their shoulders and like, well, if they go away, we're in really big trouble. Yeah. So we'd really like to see people come up with a solution for that one. That's super important.
And I haven't heard the term, lick brick. I grew up on a farm, so we had salt right, that the cows used in the summer. And I'm like, wow, that's a flashback, but it's appropriate.
Go to beimmunity.com and you can buy your lick brick there, and you can put it out in your yard and help the bees.
Go ahead, Gwen.
The CEO, their technology made the cover of Nature Food.
Oh, cool. We only have a few minutes left. So, and I know you're recruiting now for your August cohort. So tell us, if we have folks on the line that are thinking about applying, kind of tell us the process and what people should be looking out for.
I'll punt that over to you, Gwen.
Yeah, so if you go to IndieBIO.co/apply, it's free to apply. We ask you a few questions, and we usually get back to you pretty quickly. The application goes to, I think, probably 20 of us. Everybody on the IndieBIO team gets that email, and then we'll, whoever that area of expertise is, will probably jump on it and say, I'll drive this one and lead the due diligence, and you'll probably hear from us within 24 hours. I'd say that I spend most of my time talking to postdocs, some professors, PhD students. It's fine if you don't have a business idea. I've had so many conversations where somebody just told me, I have this interesting tech. I don't know if it's company. And I'm happy to just walk you through on, the pros and cons and whether you should be getting grant funding instead of VC funding, right? We may not be the best fit for you. So I'm happy to do those calls as well.
Well, I think you guys are filling a really important part of the ecosystem. Stephen, like you said, the first check-in is really important, and seeding more of these startups to grow. That's really how we get the follow-on checks. That's how we get these bigger rounds. That's how we get companies to grow here and stay here. So we are incredibly thankful that you're a part of this ecosystem, that you guys did come down here and put down roots. We're excited to see where you go after Rockefeller, but even before then, we're excited for what comes out of Demo Day in June, and really excited to see what you bring in the next cohort in August. So thanks to both of you for being here. I will, Stephen, I'll throw it to you for the last comment here about really where you think this can go, and just kind of a message to any of the entrepreneurs that are watching us this morning.
Yeah, I'd reiterate what Gwen was saying. I think the most important thing is just reach out to us. Like, we're constantly recruiting, not just for August, but we're here for the long haul. So just get in touch with us, either myself or Gwen, and we can just start talking. I think that's the most important thing. Just start reaching out to us if you've got even the rudiments of an idea that you think has commercial opportunity. Just get in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you. Like, we do want to hear from folks, especially from New York.
Thank you all. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to the New York Stock Exchange for supporting our efforts this morning and with our emerging companies. Everybody have a great day.
Have a great day. Thanks so much.
Thank you for tuning in to NewYorkBIO's virtual breakfast series. Join us every Tuesday at 9 a.m. for more discussions with leaders from across the healthcare spectrum. For more information on NewYorkBIO, please visit us at www.newyorkbio.org.